Okay, hello and welcome to the Master's Studies Information session from the Centre for the History of Science, Technology and Medicine. So this is the first session we're going to be talking about history of science, technology and medicine and a parallel programme in medical humanities. And then in the next slot, so that's 3 till 4 o'clock, our colleague Elizabeth is going to be coming over and talking about science communication. We'll probably have a different group in the room for that. So my name's James Sumner. I'm the Programme Director for HSTM. And over here, I'm not sure you're in shot, Carsten. I get to say hello. This is Dr. Carsten Timmerman, who is one of the Programme Directors for Medical Humanities. Okay. And the other Programme Director, Sarah Collins, can't be with us today, but they share that role. Okay? And Carsten is going to be talking in a little bit about how medical humanities works. I'm going to start off by introducing how the three programs work together and then say a little bit about HSTM. So, because we love science and the way it communicates, I usually start with a Venn diagram, mainly because this is the only thing simple enough to explain how the various programs overlap and connect. So, as you can see, they've all got some things in common. There's always some shared teaching. That's important for various reasons. One is, some of these programs have been quite small at times. So, in any given year, either HSTM or Medical Humanities might have, maybe half a dozen students, maybe occasionally even fewer. But a lot of the time, you will be co-taught with one or other of these programs. Science communication is always a bit bigger. That's always got at least 20 students in it. So there will always be people around. It's not a lonely experience, but at the same time, it's quite personalised. If you are used to very large room-sized lectures, it's not really like that. It's usually fairly small group teaching, but with a range of different people. The other thing, having all these connections means that we can do some interesting cross-teaching in the areas in between. So, for instance, object studies. Object studies is quite important to the science communication people because involving audiences, non-expert audiences with objects, is a good way to communicate. You can pick up a scientific object, like for instance, it might be this thing actually, it might be a smartphone, and you can tell stories about it, and you can talk about the size, you can talk about the weight, you can talk about the feel of the thing, you can talk about its relationship to the person, you can talk about original and replica scientific artifacts, you can talk about what it means that something was the first of a particular variety. Those kinds of stories are things that science communication students will focus on in terms of their communication value, because it's a very practical, very vocational course. We will talk about it more in terms of how objects function as historical evidence, and how you can supplement your knowledge that you gain from what people sometimes call traditional historical sources, like things in archives or the written record, how you can supplement that by studying objects or places. In fact, I believe Gemma took you around and showed you various of the sites of the university's history. That's exactly the kind of approach that we're interested in, because it's got a dimension of public communication, because it is using the built environment to explain changes in science, and it's looking at how changes in science themselves make changes to the wider world, as in the growth, the literal, physical and institutional growth of universities. Okay, so
I mean, there's an additional, in medical humanities, objects may take on an additional dimension, because what comes, I mean, as you see on the medical humanities, we have creative approaches to medicine and health, and objects in this context may be used to spark off a creative exercise, trigger engagement in different ways with, for example, a straitjacket, which I took along to a lecture recently. They may serve as props if the creative activity is drama. So there's an additional dimension there. But in all courses, we engage with objects as evidence, as historical artifacts, the way that James just talked about.
Okay, so the main differences between the programs, it's pretty obvious. HSDM and Medical Humanities share histories of medicine and healthcare, so not just what doctors did, what medics did, but patient experiences and fields like nursing, the technical side behind medicine, sometimes the administrative side behind medicine, the policy side behind the medical establishment. The histories of all of those fields, mostly in the 19th and 20th centuries, particularly the 20th. The HSDM program is quite thoroughly historical. Hello Robert, this is one of our current students who's going to be talking to you in a little while. So we will talk about the history of physics, of chemistry, of the geosciences, of information science, and of technology, engineering, and the roles of technology in everyday life. We will talk also about the history of policy, the way that scientific establishments form, and the history of science communication, the history of how general audiences and expert audiences were defined, and how they talk to each other, if they do, and they sometimes don't. It's mostly a historical course with some lessons drawn from policy studies and from a field called Science and Technology Studies, which is mostly sociological and anthropological approaches. So looking at the communities, looking at the groups and their values in scientific study. The medical humanities side is all medicine, healthcare, biomedicine, related biosciences, but from a range of disciplinary angles. And science communication, Elizabeth's going to talk about in the second hour. So, I'll just talk you through a few of the things that you are likely to end up doing on the HSDM program. So, this is a group of students from the previous year up at the John Rylands Library on Deansgate. Anybody visited the John Rylands? Yeah. Do go if you haven't been. It's a spectacular building with a very impressive interior and some very remarkable collections. It has some wonderful collections of rare books, some very early books. These students are looking at an original copy of Andreas Vesalius's De Fabrica from 1543. And this is a book that some of you will know has a massive reputation in the history of medicine as a book that inspired enormous changes in anatomical and wider medical practice. And so the opportunity to go and look at one of these things directly, the actual physical thing from the 16th century, this is of course exactly the kind of thing that you can make a digital facsimile of it, you can access a version of it anywhere in the world. The appeal of the original is still very, very strong. People still value the opportunity to do this. Or the equivalent in the physical sciences will be something like an original first edition copy of Isaac Newton's Principia, which is an absolutely incomprehensible book, partly because it deals with some very, very complex mathematical topics, partly because it's in Latin, but also if you can follow the Latin, it still probably wouldn't do you very much good because Isaac Newton was not that great at expressing himself, which is one of the first things you'll learn. Other people came along and did that for him, and if they hadn't done that, it is entirely possible that you wouldn't know who he was. So we use the physical object, as I say, as jumping off points for the wider stories, but also as ways into those stories. And that's Julianne Simpson, one of our colleagues up at the John Rylands. We have good working relationships with other parts of the university, like the John Rylands Library and like the Manchester Museum, as Gemma will no doubt have told you. Yeah. This is in fact the Manchester Museum. Okay, and this is, I think this is Lindsay from the Herbarium. The Herbarium, so who knew that the Manchester Museum had a herbarium? Herbariums are things that people don't talk about very much these days, but they were once massively important to the business of scientific practice. Because in 19th century botany, it's a very systematic field. It's about comparing specimens from all over the world. You can't compare live plants from all over the world on a particularly systematic basis, because it's very, very difficult to keep them alive. You can build a botanical garden, and that gets you so far, but it's very, very resource intensive. If you want a collection of an enormous number, say thousands or tens of thousands of plant specimens, then you are going to have to press them, dry them, and file them. And that's exactly what a herbarium is. If you look at this, these look like archive boxes. This is basically an enormous archive, but for pressed plants instead of documents. And they are used pretty much like documents. They're all numbered individually, and they can be retrieved, and people can get them out, and they can work on them. And so the Manchester Museum, in the periods when it first became part of the University of Manchester, so early 20th century, invested a lot in botanical studies. And it developed what was, and is, I think, the 4th largest herbarium in this country. But now, the basis of the biosciences is completely different. You never see a biologist working on one of these. They're more likely to be staring at a spreadsheet, fiddling with the statistics package. But the herbarium is still there. It's squirreled away in some of the top corners of the Manchester Museum and spreading across into the Whitworth Tower range. So it's not part of the public displays, but the people who run it still have public engagement responsibilities. And so people like Gemma have got heavily involved with this kind of activity. She was doing this when she was a master's student. We encourage people to take volunteering opportunities locally whenever they can, and has been using that as part of an attempt to answer the wider question: how can something like a herbarium engage modern day audiences when it is fundamentally tied to an older style of scientific practice? So you can learn from that about public engagement challenges. You can also learn about how scientific practice has changed. Having shown one of the big museums, it's only polite to show the other. This is a rather dark image because we are in a store. We are in a storeroom at the museum, what is now the Science and Industry Museum. It changes its name every 3 weeks to keep us confused. That's the one up at Castlefield that has the collections in engineering, stationary power, locomotives and transport, space technologies, and various other things in and around technology and the mostly physical sciences. And we work very closely with them. So the Manchester Museum is part of the university. The Science and Industry Museum, this one isn't, but we do a lot of collaborative work with them. We co-teach PhDs, and we often have, the science communication students often work on projects based at the museum or around the museum's collections. There is a lot of interesting stuff in the archive at the Science and Industry Museum, which has never really been surveyed in any detail or made the basis of any historical work. So we're always interested in people going along and finding out what they have. So one of the things we do in Intro Week, Welcome Week, every year is we take people over and we show them the stalls or whatever it is that they've got available for us to look at, go behind the scenes, and that usually builds up connections that come in handy later on. You'll notice I've been talking a lot about public engagement and community activities. That's because there's something that the university encourages, and there's something that students find really enjoyable and really useful. Okay, it's a very helpful thing to have if you're thinking in career terms, or if you're just thinking in terms of general connections. It's very useful to have some experience of this kind. So this is one of last year's master's students. This is Anne Caroline, who with 2 of the other students put together an activity based on a doctor's bag. You know what I mean when I say a doctor's bag? The old-fashioned style of rectangular leather bag that was routinely carried by general practitioners making house calls. The Museum of Medicine and Health at the University, which Marston will talk about, has a collection of such bags. Okay, they are not highly valuable. They're the kind of thing that you can take out. You don't have to keep them in a glass case. You can show them to the public, and you can put various things in them. And so Anne Caroline and her fellow students put together a display of old medical equipment, and this was actually taken in the Central Library where the Manchester Histories Festival was meeting last year. This also ran at the University Community Festival. It's a similar kind of event. They had things in there for children. They had things in there that would be of interest to older people who might remember them. And this achieved a blinding bit of success in that one of the families who came to see it actually recognised the name of the doctor, which was, I forget what it was, but it was a very common name, too common to trace. But they said, well, that was the name of our parents' GP, and they managed to get the details of the story through that connection, which I think is wonderful. So, I'll just say a little bit about the structure of the course. So, like most master's programs in the UK, it is a 12-month course. Okay, undergraduate programs tend to run September to June. Master's programs run September to September. Okay, that is why they're credited as 180 study credits rather than 120, which undergrad would be. So we have 2-semester structure. Semester 1, September to January. Semester 2, February to May. And then the rest of the time, June onwards, is when you're working independently on a research dissertation project. Okay, so you get a bunch of required survey courses in the first semester. So there's major themes in HSTM. I've got copies of the, I've only got 3 of these for 4 people. Apologies, if you could just pass them around and share them for now. And if anybody leaves without one, I can email you a PDF of that. So this is a very general course covering mostly the 19th and 20th centuries, a bit of earlier stuff, but very broad disciplinary coverage. Then in semester, we also have a course on historiography, so the writing of history, and a course called Communicating Ideas, which runs across all 3 programs, and which discusses techniques of reading, techniques of writing for different audiences, and public communication in general. In semester 2, you will specialise to some degree, which I'll say a bit more about later. And then during vacation, as I say, you are full-time on a research dissertation. And again, I'll say a little bit more about that. Carsten, if you'd just like to explain what's different on medical humanities?
As you can't see, but as I can tell you, there's a lot that is shared between medical humanities and HISTM, in that the major themes course in medical humanities involves about half of the lectures jointly with History of Science, Technology and Medicine. All the History of Medicine themed lectures are delivered to both cohorts, the HISTM students and the medical humanities students. And Hannah has one already. I'll have the syllabus here as well. Major themes in HISTM, in medical humanities, in addition to the History of Medicine backbone, as it were, that it delivers, has a series of seminars where we engage with the other aspects of the medical humanities, where we, for example, explore a number of topics through different approaches, historically, through social science approaches, or through creative approaches. If you look at the syllabus, one of the examples where we do this is in week 4, where we talk about death and dying, where we look at some histories of approaches to death and dying. We look at death and dying in poetry and in literature, and we look at some social science approaches. Similarly, in week 9, where we talk about illness, the intersections between biography and illness, and the role of narratives. So these are examples where we touch both on history, but go beyond history to social science, and the attempt is to give students the tools to explore these topics in various directions. Also, in addition to and different from the history course, there is where there is historiography of science, technology, and medicine. In HISTON, there are creative approaches to medical humanities and medical humanities. That's a unit delivered by Sarah Collins, which is a series of creative experiments, active engagement with poetry, some experimental approaches to various artistic methods. We also go on trips, which I come along as well because it's fun. And we went to the Yorkshire Sculpture Park last semester, and that's what we're doing there. In the second semester, there is the shared unit Medicine, Science and Modernity, which both HISTON master students who choose to do so take, but this is compulsory for, that's the compulsory history unit for medical humanities students in the second semester. In addition to that, they can take an option course anywhere on campus, often with a view to one or two option courses. The remaining 30 credits they can take anywhere. Usually with a view to where they want to take their dissertation. And this dissertation can take a number of directions. You see here research dissertation or creative portfolio. The research dissertation can be it's usually a history of medicine dissertation, but can also take the project, involve social science, qualitative social science approaches. The creative portfolio is a portfolio of creative work, and that can be all sorts of shapes and forms, and a scholarly commentary to make it admissible as an academic piece of work. Examples are, students take this creative portfolio according to their interests. We had, for example, last year a student on the program who is quite an accomplished musician, intercalating medical student. Intercalating medical students are medical students who take a year out of their medical degree, so they study until year 3 or 4, then do this master's, and then go back to the medical degree. And they do this because they want to study like other students, not like medical students. And Jess is a very accomplished musician, and her creative portfolio was a suite of music for waiting rooms, and a commentary on this. So she did some research for it, she presented a paper at a conference, and she did some audience research then with different types of music, and that all went into the commentary. She implemented the music. Basically, it was on an endless loop in the waiting room in a hospital in London, and then she did some evaluation there. So that was the dissertation. But equally, it can be, we've had lots and lots of artistic experiments. Another student last year, another intercalating student, wants to go into plastic surgery, and she did a project on the nose and on plastic surgery of the nose with various artistic experiments and the history of surgical approaches to the nose. And I think that's all I have to say about the different pathway in medical humanities.
Okay, so that's the full-time structure. Now, part-time, who's looking at part-time? Anybody? Possibly, okay. And for the benefit of the recording, the part-time structure looks like this. So it's the exact same courses chopped up such that you do one half of the full-time load at any given time. So in the first semester you will do half the first semester courses, and then in your second year, first semester, you come back and do the other half. Okay? So at any given time you're studying, well, we arrange it so that a part-time student only needs to come in either 1 or 2 days per week. Okay? And that will be fixed throughout the semester. So it's designed to make sense for, if you're in work, if you're working a certain number of hours a week, but your employer has some flexibility as to which days you take off, provided that they're regular, that is generally possible to manage. Okay. And then for the research dissertation, ideally a part-timer would start thinking about it towards the end of the first year and have some kind of definite plan by the beginning of the second year. But it all gets finally written up as for a full-timer in the May to September period at the end of the second year. Okay. And similarly for medical humanities, the two have roughly the same kind of structure anyway, so not in the same way. Now, the options. HSTM students, at the moment, there may be some expansion of this optionality, we'll have to wait and see, but the arrangement at the moment is that HSTM students take 2 out of these 3 courses. Okay. Shaping the Sciences, as the name suggests, is a course about scientific discipline formation and the identities of scientific disciplines. So it deals with questions like, where did physics come from? At the beginning of the 19th century, nobody was talking about physics. They had concepts like natural philosophy, which roughly maps to a lot of what we think of as physics, but it didn't have the same status that it has today. The belief that physics is somehow the most fundamental of the sciences, or it's the one that is the best representative of what a scientist ought to be, okay, a disturbing myth, but about many by physicists, came about at a particular time and for a particular reason, and has actually kind of started to go away again in recent years as the biosciences have gone through. They are much more informatic now, much more statistical, and they feel a lot harder, if you want to use that expression. So we talk about where these concepts come from, who promotes them, and why they do that. Why do people think of particular sciences as hard and other ones as soft? Why do people think of some sciences as expensive and others as relatively cheap and accessible? Why is science now done in large laboratory facilities? The stuff that Gemma was showing you this lunchtime is basically, it's an outcome of all of this. So she was showing you the old science buildings of the university, which are the old science buildings because the university built new, much bigger science buildings on the other side of the road. How does that happen and why does it happen? And what will the structures of buildings tell us? All of that stuff is in the course. Making Modern Technology, which is a course that I direct, is about, it's about very big prominent technologies and very invisible technologies. So at the big end, we talk about space shuttles, skyscrapers, suspension bridges, dams and hydroelectric projects, that kind of thing. How particular societies and particular organizations have used big technologies to promote particular views about themselves and about the way the world ought to go. But we also focus on things that you don't necessarily notice, things that you don't notice until they're gone, like internet connectivity. Okay? It just kind of sits there quietly in the background, and you may only notice it when it fails. But the way the internet is designed and set up happened at a particular time for a particular reason. It's not neutral or universal, and it sure as heck works better for some people than for others. And I'm not just talking about connectivity, I'm talking about the values behind it and who they help and who they hurt. So all of that is in the course. We will talk about technology and war, and information in society, technology and surveillance, and a bunch of other interesting stuff. Medicine, Science and Modernity. I think, Carsten, you're probably better placed to speak to that one.
only do two sessions on medicine, science, and modernity. But yeah, it's where we only touch on the we do touch on the 20th century extensively in the introductory lectures, but this is everything in more depth, and also it is in seminar format. So this is not lectures. This course involves quite a lot of reading and in-depth discussion in major themes. I did a lecture on medical science, and I've told at the beginning of today's seminar on the laboratory and the clinic in the 20th century. I've quizzed students about how much they remembered from that lecture. I wish it was more. And then went into some depth reading and discussing 4 papers on the way that the role that medicine plays in modern government has shaped the knowledge that comes out of medical laboratories. So it's taking what we've done in major themes, but exploring it in more depth with a view to, again, the dissertation and the independent research, and on the way there, 2 in-depth research essays. So that's what we do.
I should say what Carsten says there about medicine, science and modernity having a seminar format, that's also true of the other 2 options. So there are quite a lot of lectures, traditional lectures, in the first semester. Semester 2, the optional stuff is almost all, it's run by small group discussions based on particular readings. Okay. Now, you can, by special arrangement, you can take some courses, bless you, from science communication, or it is sometimes possible to take units from outside the centre. There is, of course, a full-blown and very large humanities operation at this university. That's occasionally possible for HSTM if somebody has a particular research aim that would call for it. It's fairly routine on medical humanities. That's usually what other areas. Okay, Carsten's already talked a bit about how big research projects in medical humanities work. In HSTM, you will write a dissertation of between 10,000 and 15,000 words, and here are this says some recent HSTM dissertation titles. I think, in fact, this is a list of all the titles from last year. So we had, just to give you some idea, we had students working on all these specialist topics, studying alongside each other. Some of them are clearly biomedical, some of them are, this one about university campus architecture and how modernist architecture was used to promote particular ideas. That was basically a Hist of Tech project. We had a project about representations of the telegraph in the 19th century, so going through all the newspapers, looking at how the telegraph was represented, how sort of non-experts first appreciated it or didn't appreciate it, and what that tells us about the wider culture. We had a bunch of interesting things. Again, I mentioned buildings earlier, and there were 2 building-focused projects. The university's one, and the one about the Stopford building at this university, so the building that houses the medical school, and why it ended up as it did, which is a question that a lot of people who work there scratch their heads about on a daily basis. But the answer turns out to be quite an interesting one about modular design and forward planning that didn't quite work in the way expected when it collided with the real world. Okay, that's probably enough of an introduction to the course, unless you've got anything else to say there. Any general questions about any of that?
Gemma mentioned that there is the option of just dropping into plenty of different units. Is it made available to us also from across the course, and we sort of pick and choose then?
Yes, well done, Jenna. I completely forgot to mention that, but that is one of our particular selling points. Timetable permitting, if there are no clashes, then you are welcome to attend anything on any of the 3 programs.
And we work hard to make sure there are no clashes.
We do our best. There are some, but
And indeed beyond the programs, the medical humanities students routinely audit 1 or 2 units, and that helps you also if you're a bit worried about if poetry is not your thing, but you're quite interested, and then you can audit a unit on poetry without doing the assessments.
yeah. So, no requirement to do the assessments. In fact, please don't do the assessments because we have to mark them. But yes, you can just go along and contribute to the discussions and so
Read the readings.
Right. Now, Robert has been sitting very patiently, waiting here. Would you like to just come to the front and take a seat or stand as you prefer? So you've been with us now since September, and you're studying on an integrated master's plus PhD funded studentship. So how's that going?
It's going very well. It's very strange sort of talking to you guys. It's quite interesting because I'm quite different to a lot of students in that my project is sort of pre-planned, it's already got its funding. But on the other hand, I'm still exploring whole new areas of it. So the funding application was a very short piece of paper, and I'm exploring a lot of other areas. Is there any chance that I can ask which of you guys are from a science background, or you consider it, and which of you are from
I'm from psychology, so sort of science.
And you're from humanities? English. Fantastic. I think before coming here, I talked to everyone on the course, and I asked them sort of what they got from the course and everything, and often it's very different depending on what background you're from. So I'm a former physicist, so I came to the sort of history of science program with a fairly internal image of the history of science in my head. Like, you come up with this theory, then someone looks at that theory and comes up with a new theory, and it all happens sort of inside physics. And for me, this course has been a complete and utter revelation, almost, that there's a very complex interplay between society and science, technology, and medicine, and they both affect each other in very fundamental ways. I've been told by Soraka, my friend who comes from a history background, that the scope of the course is very impressive. She came with a very specific idea about what she was interested in, which was medicine. She specifically wanted to do a project on venereal disease in the 19th century. But then the scope of this course with the technology and science modules meant that she discovered a lot of things that she didn't realize that she was interested in before she came. Which is pretty good. And so yeah, I think the main thing is that you can imagine this course as a sort of like almost like a maze of knowledge, and you all have your particular interests, but there is such a broad scoped course that you'll be able to find a sort of new way of exploring no matter what background you come from.
Do you find this is also true amongst students, that because everyone's from different backgrounds, the opportunity to share with each other?
Yeah, hugely, massively. And we all bring completely different strengths. So, having said that about the history student, when you're looking at the historiography course, for example, there's lots of interesting examples, especially at the start of the history of science becoming a subject of, for example, former physicists almost bringing a sort of physics reductionist theory to the history of science, like Thomas Kuhn. I don't know if you guys. But that's yeah. But so, in a way, especially in the historiography course, a scientist brings a way of thinking which a historian or someone from the humanities might appreciate. So it's not all just one way of, if you're a scientist, you'll learn the humanities. There's also a lot of stuff where a humanities student will learn a lot about the way that scientists think and also possibly benefit. And that's brilliant. The fact that everyone comes from completely different backgrounds is so interesting as well. the thing is this course is a lot smaller than the undergrad course I came from, which is physics here, which is about 300 people per year. But on the other hand, I found that the scope of people's interests and people's strengths was so much wider that I had much more interesting conversations. So it was great. And another aspect which I've really enjoyed and taken advantage of is the fact that obviously Chustum is in the Faculty of Biology, Medicine and Health, but you can't forget that. It kind of, because it straddles so many different aspects, so many different subject areas, there's a lot of scope for interacting with the wider university as a whole, which I greatly benefited from when I set up this magazine, this science magazine. So this Chustum's an environment where you can invite people from across the university to collaborate on something, and everyone kind of doesn't feel completely out of place. And
Because we're all out of place.
yeah, because we're all out. On the other hand, coming from the physics department is huge, has many, many staff members. Coming here, it's a much smaller department, and 10 staff members?
I can never quite do the maths. I think permanent staff, yes, either 9 or 10.
Yeah. And actually, that smaller scale is really beneficiary for a sort of personalized experience. You're able to really get to know everyone in the department. I've benefited from going to a lot of the research seminars that have been put on, and having that sort of close interaction meant that I could get a project of my own off the ground, whereas if you interact with a much larger institution like the physics department, you often have to go through a lot of admin hoops to get to a person. What else? I had something. Oh yes, on the other hand, if you're interested in going into research, or even if you're just interested in subjects in general, there's a lot of research seminars. And Chustum has great connections with the wider history of science, technology, and medicine community. So there's sometimes Chustum hosts conferences. Sometimes, Chustum's always inviting like academics from everywhere in to give talks, and I've really enjoyed sort of getting even more breadth beyond the course by attending those.
In fact, I appear to have again only brought 3 of these, but if you can spare that one, and that's one for everybody. So.
I think I've got one of these over.
Oh, you have? Oh, yes.
Oh,
excellent.
excellent.
First visit, yes, I was amazing. Yeah, so just want to tell us a little bit about what you were looking to do with Planet B.
So yeah, so when I was talking about the Chustum course of science and society having a very complex relationship, one thing that struck me is that this is a really interesting relationship that is obviously still going on now, and there's a lot of things that not only scientists but people who, well, basically anyone can talk about in the sort of vaguely defined sort of science category that are very relevant to wider society, and that students have a unique voice in it. So, for example, when you read traditional science magazines, sometimes you get a very, well, to give you an example, one of the articles is on the way that science is portrayed in video games. And that's quite interesting, I think, because it's something that is quite, it's especially important to our generation, if that makes sense. So it's a good opportunity to sort of get a unique viewpoint across that might not necessarily be represented in the wider science communication sort of industry, because it is an industry.
So it encourages reflexivity then to sort of personalise it.
Yeah. Yes. Well, if you write for Planet B, you're encouraged to write anything. And the more personal it is to you, the better, because we're looking for unique perspectives, not just repetition of, this happened in science today.
So practical. Such a good idea.
Yeah, I was pleased to see, just looking down the list of contributors here, it's kind of, it's not all Chustum, but it's more than half Chustum, and it's people from all 3 of the programs and a couple of PhD students as well. So really nice that people come together.
You'll find that again because of the small scale that you'll be able to interact with PhD students quite a lot. Some of you might be interested in pursuing PhDs afterwards. This is really, really helpful. Have you already, well, if you join the program, you'll be assigned a mentor, a PhD mentor, which basically, if you are interested in a PhD, you'll have someone who's gone through the whole process to guide you through it. Yeah.
The question I always ask is, what advice would you give to somebody who was starting the program in September this year, knowing what you know now?
I think I did a couple. It's difficult. I don't think I think one thing that I did do. This might sound a bit big-headed, but one thing that I did do, which was like really useful, is I read a couple of books. Sometimes you find that when you're assigned readings every week, it's sometimes a little bit more difficult to sit down with a book. So I would recommend, if you are planning to do this course, maybe in the summer before you start, just reading a couple of full-length books. I found that really useful because I was very lucky. There was an assignment that was assigned on one of the two books that I happened to read.
That's not guaranteed.
But we'll also help you with that because we send a summer reading list out for the in early summer.
Yeah.
Usually, if we don't forget. But so if we forget, then remind us. Where's that summer reading list?
Well, we were just talking about this, weren't we, Elizabeth? We're
Yes.
thinking of putting not only books, but online pieces and podcasts on there. Several of our students are now launching podcasts of their own. It's fascinating to watch all sorts of interesting stuff going on here.
So the book that I read was John Pickstone's Ways of Knowing, and that was a really useful book to read because John Pickstone was basically the founder of Tristan.
He was.
So I guess sometimes reading something that is from someone from Tristan might give you a better idea about sort of the ideas that have been circulating around the institute for a long time. Because the impression I get, I don't know the details of it, is that every institute of science, of the history of science, whether it's the history of and philosophy of science like in Cambridge or the history of science, technology and medicine like here, they have a different way of looking at things. There are sort of different perspectives, and sometimes getting a feel of the perspectives that have come through these doors is a good idea, if that makes sense.
Okay. Anybody got any other questions?
Just what would you say is the most challenging part of the course been for you?
For me, as a scientist, reading
Okay.
is more the sort of physical process of reading, as in you get a lot of help in the course that's run at the start. What's it called again?
Communicating ideas.
Communicating ideas. You get basically taught how to read without necessarily having to read every single word.
Yes.
But I still find that a challenge because I come from a physics background where every word is supposed to count. And yeah, well, it's
It's also nice to have the time to read things carefully, right? But it adds up. I'd love to.
Yeah.
It's an important skill, and I think actually it's not only helpful if you want to pursue the history of science, technology, and medicine further, but no matter what you want to go into, being able to read documents. Like for example, I know that some people who have done this course have gone into policy, for example, and if you're having to read a 300-page policy document, then learning how to
In an hour and a half.
yeah. So for me, learning how to read has been the biggest challenge.
How did you find the essay writing from being a physicist?
It's different. Which science are you from?
Chemistry.
Chemistry. Yeah. So I eased myself into it to an extent by taking a couple of undergrad courses in Princeton. My first essays, admittedly, didn't do as well because, again, science has a different culture. If you make a statement, you should reference it. Whereas essay writing is more about making an argument in history, and making an argument, making it persuasive, doesn't necessarily mean that you tag the most sources, which is often what an argument is in science, right? I think the main thing that's really clever about the course is in major themes, which is the first course that you do in the actual history of science, the first one only counts for 20%, and it's quite short. So you can bomb it, basically, without necessarily destroying your chances. So I think you can reflect on the feedback from your first essay and really get a better idea about how to improve your writing, as well as having specialist training from the major themes. It's really well designed. It's almost a good thing.
So there's like a touch of philosophy in there, like examining knowledge.
So when I was talking about the sort of maze of knowledge, you have so many different dimensions to it. So the philosophy of science isn't something that's explicitly sort of like focused upon in the Centre for the History of Science, Technology and Medicine, as opposed to the history and philosophy of science. However, it's essential. What is science? If you're going to study the history of science, you have to know or have an idea of what science is. And that's one of the first things that we interrogate. And there was a particular paper by Andrew Cunningham. Some people like it, some people don't, but I just found it mind-blowing. Because I read through it and I was still in my physics mindset of basically science is like reading off nature, right? And then there's this idea from Andrew Cunningham's piece, which science was invented in the 1870s, which sounds outrageous, absolutely outrageous. And I found it outrageous when I first read it. I read the paper 3 times, but every time I read it, I kind of like, it's not that it's, and this is an important thing to say about it, is this isn't the way of looking at science, but this is our way of looking at science, which offers so much more richness of interrogation. But philosophy of science is definitely in, and you can specialize, if you wanted to sort of like go down more philosophy route, there's always questions. So one of the questions that well, you always get given a list of questions for essays.
Essay questions,
Yeah.
so you can choose. You get a list of you can.
So one which I chose, which was hugely philosophical, was what are the challenges of writing a non-Western history of science, technology, and medicine? And when you're thinking about what science is, or if you're thinking about that, basically is hugely philosophical. Like, you know, what is the mantle of science? Why do we sort of think that it's important?
It doesn't have to be philosophical, that question.
Oh,
But it can be, and
Yeah.
that's what it comes to.
Yeah, you can, but there's lots of questions that it's not just sort of like what were the what happened at this time or whatever. So there are some questions like that, but there's always questions that give you opportunities to go down more philosophical angles, and I definitely did. It took me a lot longer to write that essay than it usually does, and it kind of blew my own mind, but that was really, really interesting.
Is that when you're proud of writing then? Sort of.
What's that?
Is that when you're proud of writing then? Because it sort of changed your perspectives and
Yes, it's one that I'm proud of. It wasn't my best mark, but it's one that I feel I really challenged myself with. And I think that that's ultimately what my journey as a scientist has been doing this course, is challenging myself to think in new ways. And I think it's been a very useful journey. I'm really sorry that I'm not from the humanities, so I can't. But Sorika, my friend from Sorika, my friend from history, has said that it's really, really enlightening as well. Completely new subjects and new areas to explore. And,
Okay. We don't seem to have any psychon people, so all time.
Well, we've had plenty in the past, so, oh goodness, and it is after 3 o'clock. But if anyone would like to ask questions about the relationship of the program to the science, I guess I should move up there for filming purposes, although I have a wretched cold, and would rather not be filmed. I'm Elizabeth Toon. I am kind of a hybrid person in that I am the Associate Director for the Science Communication Master's Program, which is a separate program but very closely related to Medical Humanities and HSTM, and it shares a number of
the Venn diagram up again.
Yeah, put the Venn diagram on. Yes. And they also share many courses, or many modules along the coursework. And our science communication program, the director is Professor David Kirby. David comes himself from a science background. He was actually a geneticist. And he, even as a geneticist with his own lab at a university in the US, was really bored with lab stuff. And so he retrained and now does science communication and history of the life sciences. And his particular interest is in the way that, his previous book was about how scientific advisors shape the content of science fiction films and vice versa. We don't always think about how films themselves can have an impact on what kinds of science get done, but he shows quite neatly how that's the case. His current project, a very large funded project, is about the relationship between religion, science, and science fiction films in the 20th century. And it's a great project. And he would be here today, except that he's off speaking about that project at another university. What we do is our course is more pragmatically oriented in some ways, in that most of the people who take the science communication degree are really setting out to end up in a more practically oriented position in science communication, very broadly interpreted. But they do share many courses, many modules with those of you on HSTM and Medical Humanities. For instance, the Communicating Ideas module, which is meant to be a sort of introduction to postgraduate academic skills. We kind of reinvent it every year and try to keep the best parts, redo the not successful parts. But that's a place where we actually do bring together people on all three tracks to have something to talk about. And I know that there's a lot of interest and exchange amongst the students there. Also,
before I end off, can I just say, if there's any interest in medical humanities, specifically, drop me a line and any further questions, because I'm off now.
but also, yeah, I'm happy to answer at least provisionally some of those questions.
Elizabeth can answer them.
Because I've been involved with that program for a long time, and I teach on that one. So that's what I meant by sort of a hybrid person, so that I do stuff on all three programs. See you, Carson. So we have, in the autumn, we have a more theoretically oriented course, which is meant to introduce you to the various topics that are involved in science communication, as well as a version of the major themes course that students take on the HSTM pathway and the medical humanities pathway. Our science communication students sit in on half of that course because, of course, it's very, to repeat that word again, it's very useful to have a working background in some issues in the history of science, technology, and medicine if you want to be a science communicator. In the spring, we have multiple modules that we offer that are options. One is called Science, Media, and Journalism. One is called Health Communication, which I lead. One is on science policy, and the other one is on museums and events, which is led by James. So again, you can see the way the programs relate together. Those modules are each, again, more practically oriented. And we often have guests from outside the university come in and lead sessions, whether they be BBC script writers, or in my case for the health communication class, we have everything from working artists to people who do patient and public involvement and coordinate that coming in, and behavioral psychologists, et cetera, et cetera. But basically the idea is that as an HSTM or medical humanities student, you are welcome to join any of the units on the science communication pathway. And in fact, this semester, the health communication unit has a number of students from the medical humanities pathway who are taking it, which makes it really interesting to have those multiple backgrounds as we talk about issues in sort of, we all know how we would like to change people's behavior, but what do we learn from psychology about how to do that specifically? Or the question of the role of arts, not only in sort of understanding medical humanities and the history of medicine as developing ways of experiencing medicine from alternative perspectives, but also how can the arts be used to actually formally communicate health issues? So for instance, one thing that we have, she's coming to talk to the Medicine, Science, and Modernity class, and she's also coming to talk to health communication, is a local artist named Lucy Burskoff, who has an exhibit currently on at the Whitworth Art Gallery. What she's done is she's worked with the Changing Faces charity that is interested in working with the victims of, with people who have suffered facial problems and need surgical reconstruction. And she's worked with several people to make portraits of them, but also they have gone into the Whitworth's collections and selected art that they think is relevant to their own experience. So it's a really unique exhibit that brings together patients actually as actors who have a voice in this, as well as her own artistic portrayals, as well as a chance for the museum itself to house, the gallery to house these and make these available to people who want to interact with them.
Sorry, I need to run, but
Okay.
thank you so much.
Nice.
Thanks, Hannah. Cheers.
So the idea is basically that we try to make lots of learning opportunities that work for all three programs, although people on each one will engage in a different way. The other place that I should mention that would be relevant to you, even if you're not interested in science communication, as a final destination, so to speak, is that there are a number of volunteering opportunities related to science communication, popular engagement, working with the public. And James facilitates some of those, our program facilitates some of those. Basically, as I'm sure Robert will tell you, you cannot escape a single week on the master's mailing list without being assaulted with volunteer opportunity. Whether that's to work with an exhibit by the Manchester Cancer Research Center at next week's British Science Week, because they're having a big exhibit for school children. They need all the hands they can get, or if it's some other kind of working with Manchester Science Festival, you would get a chance to work with science communication material, perspectives, and experiences, even if you don't take the course formally. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to ask. And for instance, what Rob and his group have been doing on the Planet B is a really good example of working across those boundaries, I think, and that bringing the different kinds of expertise across programs to create something that's really a wonderful blend of all three.
We found it really useful sort of working. We worked really closely with the SciComm program, so David Kirby was our academic advisor.
Yes.
And we were able to pass on initial copies to James and David. They had a look through it. Obviously not betting anything, but like just making sure that everything was up to scratch, and that was just fantastic.
So if you have any questions about the relationship with science communication, or about any of the modules on that course, or anything about medicine, science, modernity, or about medical humanities, I can probably answer any of those. But otherwise, I'll say for the purpose of recording that anyone interested in the science communication program should contact the program director, Professor David Kirby. His address is all over the GISTM website where this recording will be. And we are also happy to put any applicants in contact with students who have similar backgrounds, similar concerns. For instance, if you are a potential part-time student and are concerned about how to mix a paying job with part-time study, we can put you in touch with someone else who's doing that so you can get a student perspective rather than just our perspective on that.
Indeed. Thanks very much. Now I'm just wondering, can you folks stay around for a few minutes? And if so, would you like to hear a little bit about fees and funding? This is the
Really interesting stuff, yeah.
excellent stuff. This is so I'm not ending with the either the most positive or the most enjoyable end of the talk, but.
Well, I did introduce the subject of money. Sorry.
Quite important to be upfront about this. So, if you started your studies in the coming year, then the fees would look like this: 9,500 full-time for UK EU students, 18,500 for international students. The part-time fee is half of the full-time fee, and then the home rate rises very slightly to that inflation. That's quite a lot of money, and unlike the situation for undergraduates, there is not a national level grant or loan scheme that will cover fees and living allowances. There is a loan scheme, which, subject to certain conditions, most UK students living in England can apply for. The circumstances around the rest of the UK are occasionally complicated, and they're complicated enough to the extent that I'd probably say everybody should just ask individually if that's your situation. Okay? But provided all of these things apply, you can get a loan of up to about £10,600. Which, of course, the fees will immediately swallow very nearly all of that. So there is, unfortunately, there is no national level basis to get a loan that will study. Okay. Most of our students either save so as to be able to study on the programme, or they take the part-time route and are doing a significant number of part-time paid hours at the same time. There is a quite limited, but useful to know about, range of funding possibilities. There are some full support studentships. These are very, very difficult to get, very competitive, but well worth having if you can get one, because for a UK student, they will pay all of the fees, whatever the fees happen to be, and on top of that, they will pay living allowance, which is usually around £14,000 per year, and that is tax-free because you're a full-time student. All the schemes require that the masters be used as preparation for PhD research. Okay? This is significant because you'd have to be applying to study in the context of a known PhD research plan, which is slightly awkward because most people in our field don't really know what they want to do by way of a PhD when they're at the level that they're applying for a master's programme. That said, several students have gone through entirely successfully with a pre-mat programme, which they've gone through masters and then the full 3 years of the PhD without a hitch. And so just to go through them in the order that they're listed here. The Wellcome Trust, some of you I know about Wellcome Trust. The Wellcome Trust is a very, very wealthy organisation which funds a great deal of important work in medicine, wider biomedical research, and in fact the definition has been progressively broadened. They fund quite a lot of stuff around the biosciences in general these days, and they fund related work in the history of medicine and healthcare, in bioethics, in the wider medical humanities, and they have very kindly given us a series of master's studentships. So These are for us, the centre, to grant to a promising student. We've got 3 of them. We are probably looking to give 1 in each of the next 3 years. We don't have to do that, that's not confirmed, that's probably what will happen. And we are very interested to hear from anybody who would be interested in such a proposal. The final deadline for the application to come in, so we would need all the details of that application, is the end of this month. So if you are interested, I would strongly encourage you to take a look. The link's at the bottom there, that's just on the Chisholm website, and get in touch with the contact listed there, who is Dr. Rob Kirk. He's leading that search. He's somebody who knows an awful lot more than I do about the workings of the Wellcome Trust, and what's likely to be helpful to it and what isn't, and he will be able to advise you further. Okay, so that would be master's funding only. You would then need to go and put in a separate application for a PhD, which is, you've got a pretty strong chance of getting that PhD if you have a Wellcome funded master's to begin with and you do well in that master's program. Okay. Also, the Wellcome Trust is pretty generous. I think the living allowance is more like 15,000, and it's good on paying for research expenses. Okay. The other scheme that we know about is the one that Robert here is currently on. So the Economic and Social Research Council, which mainly funds in the social sciences, also funds a bit of economic and social history. So anything that would fit under that framework could potentially go to that council. And so they don't fund standalone masters, but they will fund masters plus PhD, what they call a 1+3, as in 1+3 years award. Okay. Unfortunately, this year's deadline has already passed. If you were looking to apply for September 2020 entry, then you need to put in an application by January. Did I put anything else on this slideshow? Oh yes. Occasionally, we are able, as in we, the centre, are able to get a specific funded project of our own, and when that happens, we may be able to announce a specific studentship, which we've definitely got and need to give to somebody. That would be on a predefined topic. It's a case of us coming in with a topic saying, this is something that we could usefully put a graduate student onto, and the council agrees, and it gives us some money, and then we can use that money, but only for that particular task. So whenever we get one of these, we will put it up on the website as that address. The university also has a funding database. If you take a look at it, you will probably find that there is not very much that is available that is relevant at the moment, but occasionally there's something, and it is worth taking a look at. Elizabeth?
Yes, we should also point out that when we schedule the in-class hours, the hours actually in session, we do make an effort to try and restrict teaching to a couple of days a week, so that even if you're studying full-time, you only will likely have to be on campus 2.5 days a week. So we expect that students who are studying full-time usually still find time to do some part-time paid work. And it depends on the student in particular what that work is. But we are conscious that even full-time students usually have to earn a bit on the outside.
It's not the kind of course where nearly everybody is a young full-timer and part-timers on normal. We always have some part-timers.
I know people who are basically on all 3, so one person's working part-time, one person's on the Wellcome Trust thing, and obviously I'm on the 3+1. I think one thing that's worth pointing out, especially for people from a science background, is sometimes there's this rumor that goes around in sciences, I'm not sure how true it is, that if you take a year out, then you'll fall off the train and you'll look down your applications. I don't think it's as true in history of science, technology, and medicine. Ultimately, we're all starting. So that's possibly worth a bit of silver lining to a horrible cloud. The other thing, isn't there a £1,000 discount for people who get a first class degree in undergrad at Manchester?
That's a very good point.
Yes, so that
there is a discount of some sort, which I think you're right. I think it's £1,000 if you've got a local first, but I would have to check that.
But when it comes to the loan, that can make a pretty sizable difference, because basically you get twice the amount of actual money in your pocket.
Also, we do frequently have students who interrupt either for paternal leave, maternal, paternal leave, family leave, or who need to take a break for other reasons, and we understand that's viable and important. Some people have several children, so through the course of their degree. So
yeah, interruption normally has to be for 12 months or a multiple of 12 months, so that you come in at the right point in the course and you don't miss bits or do bits twice. But we are as flexible as we can be on interruptions. Okay. Right. Well, thank you very much. And I shall stop the video at this point, but do remember that we are available for any comments or queries.